artificial intelligence or blockchain application that can prevent this kind of crimes?
Well, I'm aware that some law enforcement agencies, such as Interpol and Europol, I think are using such algorithms. Yeah, so I think they are doing that. So I think, and of course, financial institutions use algorithms all the time to monitor things like transaction.
Exactly.
If they can, large amounts of data, they need algorithms to be able to identify, aberrant kind of transactions, unusual transactions, and if they see that, they will, report it, or investigate it, report it, and I think that. So yeah, I think algorithms and that kind of big data analytics will be an important part of tackling these kinds of cyber-enabled financial crimes, some of which will be using cryptocurrencies and blockchain.
Okay, and Michael Skidmore mentions in an article that crime is facing a transformation because of the internet, what you mentioned before. Do you believe that crime is increasing or is just changing its shape?
Well, I think it is probably the most important thing about what's happening to crime is the changing shape of it rather than the overall number of crimes. I think there's been too much focus on the overall number of crimes, and that ignores the fact that not every crime is equal. A homicide is not equal to a shoplifting offence. Right? They're completely different things. So if we had a huge, but if you count them as the same, it's almost as if they're equal. So some academics, such as Larry Sherman and Peter Nehru at Cambridge, have developed a crime harm index, the Cambridge Harm Index, and there are other such indices out there which try to measure the harm rather than the number of crimes.
Okay.
Right? And if you do that, you find that actually, even though crime, as measured by the Crime Survey for England and Wales, has fallen very substantially since the mid-1990s, but if you look at just harm, it hasn't fallen by as much. So what that tells us is we've seen the biggest fall in the less serious, higher volume offences, and there are a lot of crimes that are now being counted which weren't previously being counted. And in the official count of crimes, we've got therefore a more complex and serious mix. So domestic abuse crime offences have been increasing in the reported crime figures. Sexual crime and things like child sexual abuse offences and so on. Now those crimes were happening before. It's just that now people are reporting them and have more confidence to report them. But it means that the police now have to respond to a different mix of crimes because thankfully we now have a society where the citizen, our view is strongly and rightly that the citizen should receive the protection of the law in their home as much as on the street. Previously, people were protected by the law in the street, less so in the home. So the police didn't treat domestic abuse cases as seriously as they should. We know that child abuse was not taken seriously by not just policing, but by society as a whole. It was people knew about it going on, but never said anything about it. They just because it was something that happened within families and within homes or within institutions like religious institutions or educational institutions and so on. Football teams and so on. This. And now we have rightly said no. All of this, people should be protected by the law in these private contexts, and so that has changed the mix of crimes which the police and the criminal justice system have to respond to. The other thing which has changed the mix of crimes is technology, which is what I was saying before. That now you have the internet has enabled a whole range, has created lots of opportunities to do brilliant things, and I think on balance, there's more good things than bad things. So I think, I don't think we should shut down the internet, although I have heard one or two within policing suggest that rather unbelievably. But what I think we should do is have we need to take into account the fact that it has also increased the opportunities available for people to abuse children, groom children, share indecent images of children. It's created more opportunities for people to defraud members of the public through scams and so on. It's created more opportunities for people to steal people's identities through phishing and other forms of scams of that kind. So it's created opportunities for ransomware attacks. I mean, all of this stuff, right? So not to say nothing of attacks on national infrastructure and hospitals, the energy infrastructure, and all of that means that the mix of crimes that we have now is more complex for the police and law enforcement to respond to, because a lot of crime. I mean, I guess if I'm dividing into these two, crimes that are taking place in the private sphere are harder to investigate in many ways. You can investigate them. There are lots of good techniques for investigating them, but they're harder because they often tend to be interpersonal crimes. Tend to be intimate crimes. They're within the family. People don't want to report them. They feel they're in relationships with people and so on. There might not be witnesses. It's just more difficult than something which takes place in the public street and might be picked up on a camera, or there might be numerous witnesses, like a fight in the street on a Friday night. Lots of people will see it. So all of that, I think, so that is more complicated to deal with. Those crimes can be investigated. There are good techniques. It just takes more time for them to be investigated, and you need resource to do that, and probably different skills, particularly around supporting victims and so on, and helping them through the process. But then what you also have is the technology, which means that crime is no longer bounded by local geography. The police service that we now have, and all models of policing in pretty much every country around the world, is based on the idea of a local crime committed against a local victim investigated by their local police. That's the model of criminal investigation that we largely have, and that doesn't work when the crime is committed by someone who lives on the other side of the world, perhaps in a country which your country doesn't have a good relationship with. So if a lot of that, if the vast majority of the 5 million cybercrime and fraud crimes affecting UK citizens in England and Wales, if the vast majority of those are committed by people operating from outside the UK, it's very difficult for UK policing to
reach.
How do you
the world.
How do you investigate that? It's complicated to investigate. How do you, if you actually, you need cooperation with local actors. You need relationships between countries such that people can be extradited to face justice across countries. Within the European Union, there are good mechanisms for doing that, but even there, it's still a bit complicated. It's not. So I think.
Do you believe Interpol interferes in these cases, or only if there's a fugitive? How does it work?
No, they play a facilitating role, I think, in helping. In particularly around sharing data and focusing on particular individuals and networks which they think are operating across borders and so on. But there's only so much they can do, so the international policing end is important, and Interpol's important. Europol has become a very significant player, a law enforcement player. It's got it's invested a lot in technology. It's got some good tools and is doing lots of really good work, but it has to prioritise. It can only focus on so much, you know, and I think that the challenge is going to be, can national policing organisation, most of the resource is still locked into national and local policing. In this country, locked into local policing, you know, so I mean, not even, you know, we have a national crime agency, but its budget is very small compared to the budget for policing overall. So I think we need to think about new forms of policing to police an internet society, which may involve
maybe an uncentralized policing.
Well, I think you probably need greater
blockchain.
well, I think you probably need a more central capability at the national level, and then partnerships between those national units internationally.
In order to exchange information
Yeah.
quickly and
exactly, and do joint investigations. You know, and Europol has facilitated a series of joint investigations of different types of crime. But if you look at some types of crime, if you look at things like child sexual offences, there are investigations against networks of paedophiles who are operating across 3 continents. I mean, there was an operation recently where there were a lot of arrests in, I think, around 20, 30 countries, you know, across and that was facilitated between Europe and the US and I believe Central America as well. So I mean, that requires a very high degree of international cooperation to deal with patterns of crime that are globalized, in the same way that the globalized economy requires rules and the enforcement of global rules, or at the very least at a regional level requires cooperation. You know, that's the model for the future. And actually, what we have in the EU with Europol is a good model, and we need more of that, I think. I mean, you know, the UK is currently leaving the EU, or is going to in about 2 months' time. And that poses a very real challenge, because one of the things that I don't think was considered properly was the fact that a lot of crime now is borderless. And you know, some people might say, well, you know, you can have better security at the borders if you leave the EU. I don't think that really works, actually, because there will still be a huge amount of movement across the border. And the reality is that what you do in Europe is the key thing is that you're sharing information and data about threats and risks. And if you leave the EU, as we look set to do, then you lose access to, on paper anyway, you lose access to a lot of that information. So we needed a different kind of policing for that kind of internet-enabled crime than the type of policing that we still need, but to deal with what I would call local crime and local harm, which is a different, I think is a different sort of form of policing.
And what does research say about the dark web?
Well, the dark web, I think, insofar as there is research about the dark web, I mean, you know, there's Jamie Bartlett wrote the sort of seminal book on this, the Dark Net, where he did a lot of research and interviewed a lot of people who operate on the dark net, and I think, you know, and that was one of the first books, I think, to shine a light on it. I mean, I think there's a lot of myths. You know, I think people sort of think that all the bad things happen on the dark net. That's not true.